So good evening, everyone. My name is Marcy Kamiker. I'm a volunteer with the OSU Land Steward program, and I serve as chair of the Education Committee, whose mission is to offer programs like the one we're attending tonight for the community, for anyone who's interested, not only those who have already participated in the full Land Steward program. The coordinator of our program is Rachel Whirling. She is away at a conference now, so she's asked me to take on the host duties tonight. And Nicole Smith is the OSU Educational Program Assistant, and she is assisting tonight. And in case we have any technical difficulties, if I lose my internet connection or something like that. So thank you, Nicole. The Land Steward program is geared toward those of us who manage rural land. And it encompasses a whole variety of topics, including forests and woodlands, wildfire risk reduction, wildlife habitat, stream ecology, economics and enterprise, healthy soils, pasture and grasslands, rural water systems, stewardship planning, and regulations and resources. And it's offered in two different formats. One of them is the one that is held in the fall is an 11-week program of field-based classes, followed by optional mentor visits in the early spring. We have another program that is about to begin, that's the online program with optional field classes, 2 optional field classes, and that runs for 9 weeks. It's beginning on April 24th with an intro class that you can attend either in person or online in the Columbia Gorge. And on the 25th, April 25th, there will be another intro class at Jackson County at SOREC. So if you're interested in that, I encourage you to log onto our website. If you can just Google OSU Land Steward Program and click on events and find out about both of those programs. There's still time to register for the spring online class. The Land Steward program also offers classes like this. We have a few more coming up. There's going to be a spring flower hike, one on native and non-native insect pests of forest trees, one on cultivating lavender. And tonight's program is co-sponsored among the Land Steward program, the Master Gardener program, and Jackson Soil and Water Conservation District. Again, this is what you will see if you log on to OSU Land Steward program. There's a long list of classes that are and events that are coming up. So tonight is one of the new classes we've just launched that we're calling the Sustainable Living Series. As I said, it's co-sponsored among the 3 organizations. And unlike the Land Steward program, which is focused on those who manage rural land, this program is for anyone, whether you live on rural, urban, or suburban properties. And it's really for anyone who's interested in learning about new strategies to promote good stewardship of our land and to protect the planet. We have a lot of really great classes coming up in this Sustainable Living series. Among them, we will have a hands-on workshop on drip irrigation, one on backyard agroforestry, which incorporates crops and pastures among trees, one on regenerative gardening, one on organic soil management and composting, rainwater harvesting, and pollinator gardens. And that one will be a Zoom class followed by a tour of some pollinator gardens. So you can find the list of all of those classes again at our website at OSU Land Steward program. And you can use this QR link to find the list of classes, the recordings, and also a list of personal actions that have been submitted by each of the speakers. There's usually 3 or sometimes 4 things that you can undertake immediately toward improving your little part of the world and the planet. For instance, tonight, these are the actions that were submitted by tonight's speaker, who comes to us from Jackson Soil and Water Conservation District, talking about landscaping. for water conservation. So now I'd like to welcome Kora Mousseaux, who is the Community Water Resource Conservationist at Jackson Soil and Water Conservation District. Now in her 8th year in the district, she provides technical and financial assistance to landowners in Jackson County to implement stewardship projects that protect and conserve water and other natural resources. Kora has a bachelor's degree in environmental studies from Southern Oregon University and has lived in the Rogue Valley for 24 years. Welcome, Kora.
Thank you.
I'm going to stop. Kora has also served on our Sustainable Living Series committee. Did that stop my share?
Yes, it did.
Great.
Right. Am I good to take over?
Yes.
All right. Well, thanks so much for that great introduction, Marcy. Again, as Marcy said, my name is Kora Mousseaux. I'm the Community Water Resource Conservationist at Jackson Soil and Water Conservation District. I'm just going to pull up my slides here. Get in the screen share. Okay. All right. And thanks so much for having me, and thanks for spending your evening with me. As Marcy said, I'm going to be talking about landscaping for water conservation. Just a brief overview or outline of what I'll discuss. I want to briefly touch about the district, who we are and what we do for those of you who haven't heard of us. I'll then dive into the needs for water conservation, certainly a review for a lot of you, but I think it's a good foundation to have. And then I'll briefly touch on indoor water conservation, certainly primarily focusing on landscaping, but I like to look at a holistic approach. And then I'm also going to discuss some stormwater management. I definitely view water conservation and stormwater management as overlapping. It's all water resources. And then we'll have some dedicated time for a Q&A and also reviewing any resources if there's time. So as Marcy said, if everyone can stay muted until the Q&A, once the Q&A comes up, you can either type your questions in the chat throughout the talk, or you can just unmute and we can have a conversation. That's totally great. Also, I'll have my contact information at the end if you want to follow up with any questions after the fact. And finally, I also will have some takeaway notes and resources, basically a summary of what I'm discussing and a bunch of follow-up resources that you can look into. And that should be sent out in a week or so along with that recording. So if it's too much information or if you're not able to jot everything down, all of that will be summarized. And then also I can, of course, answer any clarifiers in the Q&A. All right, with all that being said, let's jump into it. So Jackson Soil and Water Conservation District is a special district here in Jackson County. There's roughly one soil and water conservation district for every county in every state within the country. So if you've heard of the Natural Resources Conservation Service, or NRCS, they're under USDA, we're essentially a local counterpart to them. So along with them, we were born from the Dust Bowl era in the 1930s, where it became apparent that there needed to be an entity to help farmers and ranchers with improving their soil conditions. And so we've pretty much evolved from there. And every district, we all kind of have different capacities. Luckily, we have a tax rate here in Jackson County that was passed back in '06, which definitely helps with oversight and with a lot of our programs. And so we're super grateful for that. We're a staff of 10 people. Other districts are 1 or 2, depending on the county. It can be more than that, but it really varies. So we're one of the lucky ones in that we have a tax rate. And our driving force here at the district really is providing technical assistance for an array of natural resource concerns. I'll have a priorities list in the next slide, but we can get there in many different ways. We do a lot what we call one-off site visits, where they're free property consultations, where you can invite us out to your property and we walk around and discuss your priorities and any concerns you might be having. For example, if you're interested in replacing your lawn or installing a rainwater harvest tank, I do a lot of those. I can go out and help discuss your priorities with that. We also have a small funds or small grants program. It is very competitive. All of our staff run our own programs, and so they're all a little different. I'll be touching on the programs that I offer towards the end, but that's certainly something that we manage, and a lot of our staff help connect folks to external fundings for larger scale programs as well. We do education outreach. We teach classes like this. Just yesterday, I think it was all staff. We were at the Southern Oregon Regional Environthon helping with high schoolers with environmental education. We do tabling events, we do monitoring programs. So we do a little bit of everything at the district. So if you haven't heard of us, we're a local resource. We're free in terms of, consultations. We're essentially giving back to all of the taxpayers that help pay for our salaries. So thank you. So these are our priorities and programs that we offer, and definitely a lot of overlap. I went ahead and bolded water conservation as that's the world we're going to be living in this evening. But just give it a look if there's anything that you feel like, questions you have that you're inquiring for your properties. These are things that we can help with. All right, so diving into water conservation. So why should we conserve water? Well, our primary water source, as we know, is precipitation, particularly snowpack. And whether you're on city water or you rely on a well, at the end of the day, over time, we're all relying on snowpack regarding our water resources. And as we all know, snowpack really varies from year to year. Some years is really great, some years not so much. So kind of one of the bigger through lines I have for tonight is to treat it as if next year snowpack isn't going to be that great. And so it's important to conserve what we have, not only for your own properties, but also to make sure there's enough water resources to go around. We're a little behind with water resources compared to other states like California. I think in part it's because water here is relatively more affordable than other areas. Obviously, it's circumstantial and it can be more expensive for some folks, but by and large across the board, it is more affordable than other areas. So it's harder to incentivize water conservation. So I think one of the biggest things that we can do is just educate ourselves, educate our neighbors, our friends and families on different behavior changes we can make to conserve water. So this is the snowpack as of April, or the snow water equivalent, which basically helps describe snow in more of an area. And so we're at about 117% of the median. So not too shabby. We are just coming from winter. But I will say, even so, we're only at 48% of our reservoir storage. So this just goes to show that even though we've had a great year, we still are lower on the lower end of reservoir storage. And so there's not always, it's a bit of a delay, right? Even though we've had a great snowpack, it doesn't mean we're completely out of drought and that all of the reservoirs are over 100% full. So still very important to be cognizant of our water usage. And drought monitor, so even though we were just coming from winter and snowpack was pretty great this year, we're still considered abnormally dry as of March, and this can certainly get into more of the red as we progress. I believe last time I did a talk back in October, it was between moderate drought and severe drought. So just something to consider. Just because we've had a great snow year doesn't mean we're not still in a drought. All right, enough background data. Let's dive in. So things that you can do in your indoor and inside for water conservation. I only have a couple slides on this. Kind of the biggest thing that you can do both inside and outside is checking for leaks. It's amazing how much a little leak can contribute to water costs, not only for your paycheck, but for the water resources in general. So making sure that all of your, leaks and pipes are being inspected, or faucets and pipes are being inspected for leaks rather. You can consider installing a faucet aerator, which essentially mixes air with the water, and it can save up to 50% of your water costs. And more so for new installations, you can consider insulating water pipes. Basically anything you can do to avoid running water too long. So in the summer, not having for it to run too long for the water to cool, or in the winter, not having to wait for it to warm. Just little things that you can do. And then you can replace appliances, dishwasher, washing machines with more eco-friendly, the newer versions. You can adjust the load size more and they use less water. And also, I'm sure we've all witnessed this, people hosing off their driveways or back porches or decks. If you want to clean an outdoor surface rather than using water, I'd recommend using an electric leaf blower or just a broom. That, little here and there can save a lot of water over time. And gray water is beyond what I'm going to be discussing tonight, but that is also something to look into. And it can be as simple as having a bucket at the bottom of your shower and then using it to water your plants. So just little things you can do inside. But I'm definitely going to focus on outdoors. The conservative numbers for outdoor water use is about 50% of your water bill. Obviously, it's seasonal, but about 50% or more is used outside. And so I think if you're going to prioritize in where you're saving water, what you're going to focus on, I think outside is kind of going to be your biggest bang for your buck, so to speak. So this is a chart from the Medford Water Commission, and it's describing water usage seasonally. So it's running from July to July. And it's, we all know we spend more water outside or use more water outside in the summer, but it's a very clear indication that most of the water use is happening during the summers. Just another reason to focus on outdoors for water conservation. And so I always recommend starting practical and simple and more, what do I do to my existing system? What behavior changes can I make to my existing system? And then through trial and error, you can get more complicated if you want, but it can be super simple in water conservation. You don't have to replace your whole lawn in order to conserve water on your property. You can, and I'll go through those steps in the next section, but there's also some things that you can do with your existing system to save water. So first and foremost, having an efficient irrigation and making your practices more efficient with irrigation. So again, checking for leaks. I think I mentioned this several times throughout. It's a big one. And making sure all of your sprinkler heads are adjusted. I'll talk about that, more of that in a bit, but making sure they're not oversized, essentially making sure you're not overwatering areas. And also adjusting automated timers. Now, some people have super fancy systems that are connected with their phones, and it can be, kind of programmed with weather data, which is super cool. If you're like me, I just have one of these standard automated timers for my lawn. I rent, otherwise I wouldn't have as much lawn. But I just have a simple, it's an equivalent to a Rainbird automated system. And these are great. It's, you can program them, but it is important to be smarter than the system. And so if you know it's going to rain next week, for example, you can just shut that system off and then restart it. You want to make sure that you're not double watering. And so, and also adjusting the times every month or so as the climate changes throughout irrigation season is also great. So that way you're not over or under watering. And a second thing that you can do that's super simple just with your existing system is mowing your lawn high. It's completely free, just using your existing mower. This helps strengthen the roots, and just like any other plant, the longer the root mass is for your lawn, not only can it outcompete weeds better because it has stronger roots, but it has better water retention. And with better water retention, it's not having to be watered as much. I also have to plug some water quality things in here. If you do use the fertilizers or pesticides or anything like that, make sure that you follow the label. And also please properly dispose of lawn clippings. This can cause bad conditions for fish if it goes down storm drains or it gets in the streams. So these are different types of sprinkler heads, common sprinkler heads. Now the top two, the rotor head and the impact, these are more common in larger scale. So you'll see them in ag fields and larger commercial areas. But if we're just talking about your yard, unless you have a really huge yard, and you might, but if we're just talking about a standard residential kind of suburban lot, it's likely overkill. It's likely too powerful and it's putting out too much water too quickly. And you're likely going to be losing water, and you might be losing a lot of water to evaporation as well. So you probably will just need spray or a rotor nozzle. The nozzles are great for more of those corner areas, and then spray is great for more of the middle of the lawn. And it's nice to have, you want some overlap with your sprinklers because you want to make sure you don't have any, dry areas of lawn, but you don't want too much overlap where you're essentially double watering. So this is why it's important to check all of these at the beginning of the season and have all of them going and walk around, make sure that they're all set up, because once it's automated, we kind of forget about it and you don't want to be losing water, at 5 a.m. before you even wake up. So here's an example of what mowing high can do. And it doesn't take much to create that much more root mass. And so according to NRCS, for every 1% of increased soil organic matter, which includes roots, this can help store 20,000 gallons more water per acre. So that's major. It's a major water savings for just a super simple behavior change. And I don't know about you, but something that's free that I can do, today to save water, I'm going to do it. So I do that within my yard. I really don't have many weeds problems, and I water my yard as little as possible, and it comes back every year. All right, so again, checking for leaks. I have those water resources. I just keep mentioning that. If you're on a well, something to consider is installing a sensor. So if you're within the city, we have our meters. A lot of us even have those smart meters where it can actually send the city a notification if there's a leak, which is super nifty. It won't tell you where, it just will tell you that there is a leak. But if you're on a well, you're kind of on your own in terms of knowing if there's a leak, or even knowing if you should conserve water. How much water are you actually using each day? So having a sensor installed is a really great starting point in order to know how you should conserve. And then as you're, making these behavior changes, you're able to measure those conservation actions and seeing what difference it's making. So I'd recommend installing a well sensor. And then after that, we're getting into more expensive things that you can do. And so you can install a water storage tank. I'll be talking about rainwater harvest in the stormwater section, but I wanted to mention it here too, because it's definitely a water conservation technique. And so it's certainly a tool in the toolbox. More to come later. And then you can also replace your lawn, either your entire lawn or certain sections that's dedicated in the entire next section. And then you can also consider installing other stormwater features within your lawn replacement. Again, I really see these as one and the same: stormwater management and water conservation. All right, so diving into waterwise landscaping. And again, just a reminder for those of you who just arrived, if you have any questions, please type them in the chat box. I'll have plenty of time at the end for Q&A, and I'm happy to answer those questions then. So what is xeriscaping? So xeriscaping and waterwise landscaping, I use them interchangeably. It's one and the same. Essentially, it just describes a yard that strives to use less water than a traditional yard. The root word xeric means dry. I believe that's in Latin. And so it doesn't mean it's a lack of landscaping. It's not zero-scaping. It just means you're striving to use less water. And so the great part of that is that it's super customizable for your lot. So these steps that I'll be describing are pretty general. And so that's why I love the Q&A session, because if you have specific questions in your yard, hopefully that'll provide inspiration for others as well. But there's certainly a lot you can do with this to fit your needs and your priorities. So here are the 7 main steps. And I have these summarized in notes that we'll be sending out, so you do not have to memorize all of this. First and foremost, plan and design. Definitely the most important step. I really don't think you can overplan a project. And within planning, creating a site map is super useful, especially for us visual learners. And I'll kind of describe things to include in the site map. I've included this a few times throughout the project, and I just want to make sure that everyone is keeping firewise in mind, particularly after, a few years ago with the local fires that we have and during the summers. I think it's important. All of the varieties of plants that we're choosing and different designs we're making are with firewise and being more fire conscious in mind. So I'm just saying that in case I forget to mention it later, that we'll just consider that with all of these designs and plans. So creating a site map, what I like to do is I like to work what I'm initially working with, all of the permanent features, and then you can start to add layers of different ideas, and that can help narrow down what to do where on your site. If you're having trouble prioritizing what to do, maybe it's not necessary, but I personally find it useful kind of having a blueprint of what to start with. So you can draw this to scale, just measure the dimensions of your home. You can also trace on a printout of like Google Maps is also nice, just so things are to scale. And you can mark where your home is, garage, where your shed, if you have a shed, AC units, big trees, just things that aren't going to move, your sidewalk, your driveway. And once you have all of that out, then you can mark your downspouts. This is useful for if you're going to divert those downspouts into landscaping, for example. And then you can have layers of other features such as low spots. If you have maybe certain areas of your lawn that are always saturated, different areas that are sunny most of the time, shaded most of the time, and it can kind of help narrow down what to do where. Planning your budget, it's also really important. We have contractor lists and nurseries lists, I will mention. So if anyone is interested in calling and getting quotes locally, obviously we can't recommend companies, but we compile lists as our clients use them. I recommend getting at least 3 quotes to make sure you're getting a good deal. But certainly it's important to plan financially too, to make sure that there's no unforeseen costs budget-wise. And then you can choose how you want to design this. It's super flexible depending on your preferences. It can be super formal with a lot of pavers, or it could be just more of a natural landscape. Really depends on what your aesthetic is going towards. So great part about waterwise landscaping is it's both functional and it's super beautiful. Can add a lot of curb appeal to your property. So after you plan, planning is always step 1, but after you plan, all of these other steps are kind of a feedback loop. And so there's not necessarily a perfect order to the rest of these, but this is the order that we have. So creating practical turf. So again, you can still keep certain sections of lawn if you want. You definitely don't have to if you don't want to, but a lot of people have pets. A lot of people have kids or grandkids that like to play in the grass. And you can also consider accessibility. If certain areas of your lawn are just really awkward to mow, you can replace those areas. You can consider near the foundation or near a fence line, just different areas where you don't want to have to mow or have to water that close to infrastructure, for example. You could consider replacing that. So those are some examples. You can also consider shade and sun tolerant areas. And so if there's an area of your lot that's pretty much shaded out year round and maybe your lawn isn't doing so great, you can replace that with shade varieties instead. And then also the other example is if you have a super sloped area and it's maybe inaccessible to mow, or you find you're losing a lot of water because it's just running down slope, that would be a great area to plant. And you can even do like a terraced design, and that can help save water as well. So along with creating those practical areas of turf is grouping similar plants. And so again, this can go for if you want to still have some lawn or completely replace. Again, we want to keep those firewise plants in mind, plants that have less woody debris. And I have plant lists on all of that, and a lot of our partners do as well. I know OSU Extension has so many plant lists. I'll be reviewing some of those resources at the end. So regarding grouping similar plants, it's all about microclimates. So some plants require more sunlight than others, and some plants do better in certain soil conditions. So it's really determining what is your microclimates, what's going on your property, and then you can pick plants to suit. Amending the soils is one of the steps here, and it's definitely nice to amend the soils. But I always like to recommend, rather than fighting against nature, rather than fighting against the existing conditions that you have, plant based on the site rather than trying to make the site something that it isn't, if that makes sense. So yeah, looking at the light conditions and looking at the soil type, and those will also likely have different watering regimes, so you can plan your irrigation accordingly as well. And there's kind of two main xeriscape designs I'll be talking about. First, I call more of a mulched design, and this has all native varieties, and they're kind of more softer in terms of they're not hardy like a desert hardy plant. You can do more of a rocky xeriscape design, kind of more of the stereotypical water-wise landscaping with like the succulent gardening you'll see in New Mexico and Arizona and places like that. It's really not a preference on my end what you do. The rocky ones, they're not all 100% native. They're obviously not invasive, but so it just comes down to personal preference and aesthetics. So I'm going to be reviewing just some plant examples, but we have a full plant list on our website for the full list. So here are some examples where you can incorporate trees into the design. And again, something to consider that if your area is going to be shaded out by a tree, that any plants underneath should be shade tolerant. Here's some shrubs. I won't spend too long on these slides just to give you an idea of visuals. And then flowers. And you can also incorporate grasses, just not the planted fescue, like standard actual grass seed, but the actual bunch grasses. And I have some California fescue, and after a couple years of watering, I just ignore them and they're doing great. So kind of the main goal of all of these plants is after a couple years of establishment, obviously, once it gets over 100, they might need some extra water, and you need to pull weeds and whatnot regarding maintenance. But other than that, the system should be pretty self-sustaining. The yard should be pretty self-sustaining in terms of water input, right? The water saving is the goal. So here's the rocky design, more desert-esque. Cacti and succulents, pretty. All right, so now we're getting into step 4, which is improving the soil. And so in order to improve the soil, we need to know what soils we're working with to start with. And so you can do this just by a hand test, just wetting the soil. And if it has a lot of clay, it'll roll up into a ball. If it has a lot of sand, it'll be super gritty and fall apart. And if it's somewhere in the middle, it probably has a good amount of silt in it. The ideal soil type is that beautiful, luscious loam. But again, we don't always have that on our sites. Clay is pretty notorious in this area. And then in other areas like in Ashland, the granite is super notorious. So we want to amend the soils to be suitable for landscaping, but again, we don't want to completely try and transform the soil so much that we're trying to make it what it isn't. So just selecting the plants based on the soil type is important. So if you haven't heard of Web Soil Survey, if you're within the Land Stewards class, I'm sure you have, but if you haven't, this is a resource where you can look up your native soil types. This is from a survey back in the 80s, and I can review this and even do a demo if you are interested in our resources review at the end, but I wanted to include this here to show you what it provides. And so you can go on their website. Again, I can do a demo afterwards, but it can show you different boundaries of different soil types. And this can be super useful in telling the story. I will take the boundaries with a grain of salt. You know, if it's your yard and you've been digging around, you know, you have a pretty good idea of what's going on. But if you don't really know where to start, I think this is a good starting point. And I personally like to look at the profiles, and I look at the slopes, depth to restrictive feature, which is really useful if the water table is nearby. That could explain some flooding possibly. The drainage class, so it'll describe if the soils are well drained or not. And then also the depth of the water table. And so sometimes this is at the SOREC or OSU extension. And so they have pretty similar soil types, a lot of loam, you know, it makes sense. This is ag land, so it's going to have nice soil, right? But there's some soil where you could have like a sandy loam and then a hard pan right next to it. And those are the two different soil types. And that could describe some issues regarding drainage. And so it's nice to know what soils you're working with prior to doing any work. It just really helps set a foundation of what you're working with. And it can help determine how much water that area will require. So in order to amend the soil, it really depends on what soil you're starting with. I've really found across the board, compost is pretty fantastic. But there's lots of different types of amendments you can make. This chart I actually have saved in those follow-up notes, so you don't have to jot all these down. But I find it's a helpful starting point in amending your soils. Step 5 is mulch, ties into soil amendments, but it also helps with the water retention and weed abatement. As I mentioned before, though, regarding firewise and being more fire conscious, I would not recommend having bark mulch right next to your foundation. I would rather just recommend like a standard gravel 3/4 minus, for example. It's just going to be way hardier and just less of a fire risk. It also will encourage less ants to come inside your house. You can certainly have bark mulch in other areas, but you know, within a few feet of the home, maybe less of a priority. Just throwing that out there in terms of being more fire wise. So here are different types of bark mulch. There's all different types of mulch out there. And so regarding water conservation, this is from OSU Extension. It's a great resource. It looks like arborist mulch and mint compost are ranking at the high mark. And I've certainly had clients that have scored on arborist mulch. And so that's just wood chips from arborists from around the area. Some people have had reduced rates. Some people have been able to get them for free. So I know mulch is pretty expensive. So certainly call around if you know a person, jump on the opportunity, can help with your landscaping. All right, step 6 is efficient irrigation. So sorry for all of the text. This is just, you know, things that we already know, but regarding more of those behavior change, like I talked about with those automated timers, adjusting your system accordingly for climate, making sure to water in the morning. You can also water later at night, but definitely avoid watering midday. You're just going to be losing water and have to water more, which is what we don't want to have to do. And regarding irrigation, similar to fitting sprinklers for lawn, you'll do the same for landscaping. So fitting more like those micro sprays or drip based on the plants and based on the areas of where the plants are. And I really don't have a personal preference on drip or microspray or soaker hoses. I really just leave that up to clients on what their personal preference is. I know some people absolutely love drip and other people don't like it as much. So I think it just comes down to finances, what are you willing to maintain, and what's the most customizable to your area. And it's also a lot of trial and error as well. But the great part about these plant varieties is, again, they really only need a good amount of water for the first 2 or so years, and then they're pretty self-sustaining. So these irrigation systems don't need to last as long as like raised bed irrigation systems would. By and large, you still want to utilize them sometimes, but you're not going to be using them as regularly, ideally, over time. Again, inspecting for leaks, make sure that you don't have any leaks happening, and then changing according to weather. So you can have drip emitters, micro sprays, there's bubblers, there's soaker hoses. Really depends on the site. It depends on the size of the plant too. And then step 7 is just good old maintenance. You can install an amazing system, but it's only as good if it's maintained. So making sure that you are weeding, trimming perennials, and checking for leaks at the end of the system, and then also doing pre checkups at the beginning of irrigation season, just like you would with a lawn. Okay, so let's see. All right, I'm just going to keep going through. So now we're getting into stormwater management. So I know these are some basic definitions, but I just wanted to define some terms in case you don't know the definition of LID, for example. So stormwater is defined as precipitation in the form of rain or melted snow, and it is supposed to naturally fall and soak into the earth pretty much on contact, right where it lands. But over time in our developed world, we have all of these impervious surfaces now. We have our roofs and buildings and streets and sidewalks. And so that water can't always soak in right where it lands. And so we've diverted it, right? We have all these pipes and infrastructure and systems, and we'll eventually usher that water back to the creek. But in the meantime, that water is not only picking up velocity, and it can cause erosion issues, but it's picking up all of these pollutants from these impervious surfaces. So essentially the goal of low impact development, and also known as green infrastructure, is we're trying to mimic those natural processes in order to encourage infiltration and to make sure that the water leaving the site is clean and that it's not dirty. As hopefully most of you know, our storm drains are not filtered. So any water that goes into the storm drain is piped straight to the creek. So it's really important that whatever we do on our lots to make sure that that water is as clean as possible. So there's really 2 main benefits of stormwater management, and they're very interchangeable. It's hard to say what's the chicken and what's the egg, but reducing the water quantity leaving the site and then improving the water quality leaving the site. And this can not only help with your water practices within your yard, but it can help save money as well, and definitely ties into water conservation. So here are some main stormwater features that are pretty common, and I'll be going through these super briefly. If you want a more deep dive into rain gardens and bioswales, there's actually a recording of a class I did, I think it was a couple years ago now, on installing those features. I go into way more detail, and so that's on the OSU Extension YouTube. And then if you want a more of a deep dive on rainwater harvest, I'll be doing a class in September. So I'll just be giving a general overview because I think most of these, if not all, can be incorporated into a waterwise landscape design, and it can help just enhance the functionality of your site. But yeah, I just wanted to touch on all of these. So before I dive into all of the features, I wanted to talk about some basic behavior change, and it'll be quite apparent on how tied stormwater management is with water conservation. So a lot of times we'll see stormwater issues of flooding of streets and sidewalks, but typically this isn't always just from when it rains. It's usually someone's overwatering their lawn and then it rains and then you have double the water and then there's nowhere for that water to go. Or it could be that the sprinklers are not adjusted properly, and so people are doing really well at watering the sidewalk rather than their lawn or their landscaping. So just certain things to consider regarding tweaking behaviors, watering less and watering properly, and making sure that sprinklers are properly sized. Pooling in lawns likely has to do, again, with overwatering, and it could also come back to those soil types, making sure you know what your soil types are to encourage what your watering regimes is. And then if you have erosions near a foundation or pooling, there's water collecting around a foundation. This could be around a house or a barn, any foundation. It likely has to do with improper or too small or a lack thereof of downspouts. So I think all buildings should have downspouts. A lot of outbuildings don't, but I encourage everyone to install downspouts if you can. It really helps with routing that water to a proper area rather than directly where the foundation is, because that can cause infrastructure damage. And so I recommend not only to install downspouts if you don't have them, but to have diverters, and then you can even divert them not only into landscaping, but into a stormwater feature, including a rain tank. Construction zone maintenance, this is kind of its own category, but I wanted to include it in here that, you know, construction folks will have silt fences and they try to avoid compaction and sedimentation. So if you're doing any work on your property, making sure that you don't have any excess soil going into the street or storm drains as well. Improper fertilizer and pesticide application, again, follow the labels if you do use them and use them sparingly. Improper riparian zone management. These really riparian areas, the stream side areas, the vegetation near creeks, act as a big stormwater buffer. And they really are the last thing prior to that water re-entering the creek. And so it's important that if you have a creek running through your property, that you maintain that creek properly. We have a lot of information on riparian management at the district. So if you have questions on that, feel free to reach out. But that's a major one because creeks are something that, you know, all of the water is connected and it's something that it impacts a lot of people. And so making sure that those creeks are maintained properly and that invasives are removed, natives are replanting. If you're going to remove invasives, you need to replant with natives, and that also helps with firewise as well. As we know, the Almeda fire started primarily, or it spread primarily due to all of the blackberry. And so keeping the blackberry at bay and having natives in its place can not only help with soil, holding the soil, erosion control, but it also helps with stormwater management and filtering that water as well. And then finally, storm drain management, keeping debris or lawn clippings or anything free from those areas. I also encourage folks to, as it might seem counterintuitive, but drive-through car washes actually are way better about reusing their water, and then their water goes into, it's the equivalent of our sewage. And so that water is actually processed, whereas if you just wash your car in your driveway, that goes down the storm drain and then it goes straight to the creek. So it's actually more, they're more water quality conscious of you to go through the car wash, which was not intuitive to me. But if you think about it, all the water being used through, you know, thousands of cars within that day versus all the water we use from our hose watering our driveway, it's probably going to be more efficient going through the car wash. So this is more, so the first one was more urban and residential. That's what we're focusing on today. I do like to mention rural and ag for those of you who are more maybe rural residential. All of these behaviors and solutions can be scaled up or scaled down depending on your property. I think it's all valuable. So if you're flooding in a field or a pasture, This could be very similar to if you're flooding in your yard. It's likely over irrigation or you don't have properly fixed sprinklers, and you could probably be overwatering. Manure piles, this goes for pet waste as well. Make sure you pick that up for water quality. Improper, again, the pesticides and fertilizers, we talked about that from before, same thing with ag. And then riparian management. And also heavy use areas, installing drain rock is super useful. This goes for any area. If you're going to be kind of digging around or you have a heavy area that has a lot of exposed soil, the thing we don't want to do is have exposed soil. And so something I don't know if I don't think I mentioned this before regarding the lawn replacement, but I definitely recommend if you are going to replace your lawn or install a rain garden or do any excavation work, to do it not in winter because you don't want exposed soil and then for it to rain and then you're essentially dealing with a mud pit. So I'd say early summer is best where the soils are still workable, but we don't have that rain to deal with. That's the most ideal time. Okay, so now that we have all of those behavior changes out of the way, I'm just going to briefly describe these stormwater features, which can be coupled with the waterwise landscaping. Particularly, I think rain gardens are really fantastic to pair with xeriscaping. And that's what this client did. She removed her entire lawn and replaced it with waterwise landscaping, and then this lower section is a rain garden. And I'll show you a couple examples, but they can really be any shape to match your yard and to match, kind of the setup. And it can be deeper and wider in order to accommodate for poor drain soils as well. So the main goal of a rain garden, so it's a sunken depression, and the main goal is to enhance infiltration, basically helping water drain on site in that location like it would in the natural world, right? And so they can be standalone. They could also be coupled with another stormwater feature. So for example, this site, she was piping in water from her roof into the rain garden, but this could also just be in the open and then any excess water flows into it as well. And then there's overflow involved. And in this case, she had overflow. It's kind of hard to see, but the drain going in is here and the drain going out is about here, I believe. And that just went into an existing ditch. But if you have an existing storm system or anything like that, that can be the overflow. And another stormwater feature, such as a bioswale, can also be an overflow. So again, super customizable. You just want any stormwater design, you want to make sure you have an overflow. So in case that system fills up with water, you're able to have control as to where you're diverting excess water. So here's a cross section of a rain garden. And so there's three main zones. There's a moist zone, a moderate zone, and a dry zone. And so you want to plant these zones accordingly. All rain garden plants are going to be water tolerant, but also be able to completely dry out in the summer. But the ones in the moist zone really can take on the water. And then moderate is moderate, and then dry is only experiencing water in the high storm events. So the centermost is where you're piping in the water. So you're piping in water to this base moist zone, and then it fills up within that zone. And the Oregon Rain Garden Guide is where I get all of my rain garden information. And I also have it cited in the resources and in the follow-up notes. But if you're interested in installing a rain garden, I highly recommend to go to the website. You can just Google Oregon Rain Garden. It's through OSU, it's through Sea Grant, and they have a free PDF you can download. So here's an example of rain garden designs for Southwest Oregon. So different shapes depending on what your interest is. Typically, they're more of an oval or a kidney bean shape, but really just depends on your aesthetic. And so here's an example of both sun and shade tolerant. So again, depending on those microclimates, selecting the proper plants for those areas. And so here's materials for a rain garden. I'm not going to spend too long on this page. These are all listed in the guide. But there's layers of rock in order to increase the drainage. And then you have amended soil, compost, and mulch on top. And then you obviously have plants, and then you have pipes. And the pipes are, where is the water coming from? And then where is the water going? So that's having to do with, you know, if it's coming from, typically it's coming from a roof, and then it's going to whatever overflow system it is. And again, that can be a ditch, it could be a storm drain, that could be a bioswale, just depends on the setup. And so here's that example with a little more detail. And so they completely replaced their front yard. And this was about $10 a square foot, but it just depends on the site. So it really depends on the materials that you purchase. So it's hard to throw numbers out with even lawn replacement, because it really depends on the materials that you use, how many plants you plant. But that's kind of just, you know, real world example for you. And that site's still working well today. It's a few years old now. So in order to size a rain garden, it has to do with what you're collecting that water from. If it's just open and it's just within your yard for waterwise landscaping, there's kind of less requirements. But if you're piping it directly from an impervious surface, such as a roof, then you're really going to want to make sure it's sized appropriately. You want to make sure you're not sending too much water directly to a rain garden, and it's just going to immediately overflow. So it's pretty easy to size a rain garden if you're basing it off of a roof. And that's the next page. So if you have what we call well-drained soil, so it's faster than 2 inches per hour, and within the Oregon Rain Garden Guide, they will show you how to make a test pit, but you're essentially wanting to dig a hole in your soil before you do any of this to see what your natural infiltration rate is. Even with amendments, we want to make sure that the native soils are going to work with the conditions of a rain garden. And sometimes if the soils are just too poorly drained, it's simply not worth it. Again, going back to trying not to fight nature, but just trying to amend and adapt your system on what it wants to naturally do anyways. And so if you have a faster system where it's draining 2 inches per hour from that test pit, you can size your rain garden to be 10% of a roof. So in this example, for a 1,300 square foot roof, the size is 130 square feet for the rain garden. And then if you have poorly drained soil, so if it's between a 1/2 inch and 1 inch per hour, you want to double that. The poorer the soils, the bigger the rain garden to allow time for that water to filter in. If it's any worse than that, I just would not recommend installing a rain garden. But yeah, that's how to size them. Safety considerations for any excavation. I wanted to make sure I included this to make sure you dial 811. This is the locate services. It's a free service, and they'll make sure that you're not going to be hitting any utilities prior to digging. And also to avoid structural damage, you want to make sure to not install a rain garden too close to infrastructure or to impervious surfaces. Or to a fence line. You don't want to inadvertently be sending water to your neighbors, right? So it's important to space the rain garden out accordingly so there's not any water washing back and damaging anything. All right, so now diving into bioswales. So bioswales and rain gardens, a lot of people don't know the difference between them because sometimes they're used interchangeably or they look very similar. So to clarify, the bio prefix just implies that there's plants involved, but there's also a lot of rock swales as well. So that's what bio means. And so they can be rocks, they can be plants, or they can be both. And essentially the difference between a rain garden and a bioswale is, again, a rain garden is a sunken depression meant to help with infiltration in that area, and it's supposed to drain quite quickly. You shouldn't have standing water or anything. Whereas a bioswale is really designed to transport water from point A to point B. And along the way, if there's plants, it helps filter and soak in that water over time. And if there's rock, it helps slow down that velocity of the water. So bioswales are nice in areas where you might have like flooding. It's nice along sides of driveways or where you'd have ditches. You can kind of line ditches with vegetation. You can even place them perpendicular to slopes. So for example, in ag fields, they can be scaled up. And if it's too steep to place a bioswale this way, you don't want to create more erosion, but you can place the bioswale perpendicular to the slope, and that can help break up that velocity of water. So they're essentially a replacement to a pipe or a French drain. Obviously, if you have enough of a flooding issue, a French drain is probably necessary anyways, but think of it as a replacement of a drain pipe. It's a natural drain pipe. And again, similar to rain gardens, you want to make sure that they're not too close to foundation or property line and that they're maintained. That goes for rain gardens as well. Vegetation is maintained. You're pulling weeds regularly in order to make sure that they're being functional. Similar materials, just a little simpler than a rain garden, but they have those rocks, pipes, plants, and then soil amendments and mulch. All right, now going into porous pavement, I'd say this is the least popular that people call and inquire, but I wanted to include it just because it ties into waterwise landscaping as well. I think, you know, porous pavement, pervious paving, those are used interchangeably. They're more on the expensive side. It's great to install a pervious driveway if you are installing a brand new driveway or maybe you're building a new home. But if you're just dealing with an existing system, I'd say it's less of a priority. I'd say porous pavement can be used as simply as pavers rather than having, you know, a concrete pathway in your backyard, for example. You can just include pavers. And so I like to think of porous pavement as more on the simple side. It's cheap, it's easy, and it doesn't involve digging up perfectly good driveways. But I really am curious. I know different areas have done pervious pavement, porous pavement, different freeways, they've tested it out. And so I'm curious, you know, over time, what comes of it. It's fairly new. Kind of the main features is that you have these layers of porous substrate, and then you have an under drain, and that under drain goes into the storm system. But on the simpler scale of it, the more practical scale of it, because again, we want to start simple and practical, you could just do something like this, where you're replacing a good portion of your lawn, and within that, you're adding porous pavement as well. So I consider this both a water-wise landscaping and a stormwater management project, because rather than installing a, you know, impervious surface for a pathway, they just installed pavers and called it a day. All right, so rainwater harvest, again, I'll have a whole class on this in September, but rainwater harvest is definitely a great tool in the toolbox. This is the most popular thing that people ask me about, and it's one of the most popular programs that I help run at the district. And rainwater harvest helps with stormwater management, but also water conservation as it's storage and can be used for supplemental irrigation. So on average, it's roughly $1 a gallon for a rain tank, and that doesn't include all the different pipes and potential overflow you might want, or if you need a pump, all of that's extra. The bigger the tank, I've seen the more water savings, so just something to consider. If you have a barn, or for example, you could probably buy a tank for less than $1 a gallon. It really depends on the contractor. And I will also mention that we have, I believe I already mentioned we had a contractor and nursery lists, but if I didn't, we have contractor lists. So I have a water conservation section within that where we have a lot of water harvest contractors and vendors, and I just keep adding the list as clients you know, hire more and more folks to help with them. And kind of the top 3 themes I have seen regarding rainwater harvest, first and foremost, is to help with supplemental irrigation. And then second to that is just to have extra water on hand for fire storage. It's just nice to have that extra source of water. And you can always use it for irrigation, but you could also just have it during the summer. It's just a nice peace of mind. A lot of the tanks, they have openings at the top of them. So a fire hose could actually attach to that. And then folks have also made sure that the bottoms are fitted to fit a fire hose as well. I always try and recommend that, again, going back to that firewise theme. So multi-purpose, you can also use them for stock water, and there's so many other usage. But it's definitely a popular stormwater feature. So there's 7 main steps. I don't have sub pages for all of these steps, but you first want to determine what your property needs are. You want to determine your water needs. How much water do you anticipate using? And that can help determine the size of your tank. Determine the location. They need to be on a flat surface. So you don't want to place them on a slope. You want to place them somewhere where it's flat, and sometimes you'll have to flatten that out yourself. And concrete pads are the most popular, just to make sure that the tank is completely on a flat surface. And then determine what features you want for installation, depending on if you want to collect the water right then and there next to whatever roof you're collecting, or it needs to be pumped to an area. Determine everything you're going to purchase, and then what's the overflow route. So overflow is a big thing with rainwater harvest. Overflow could be another tank. It could also be another stormwater feature like a rain garden or a bioswale. I've had clients do both and they work great. And then you could also just point overflow to an existing creek or a ditch. Basically, you can point it to wherever the water is going to be naturally going. You don't want to create a new drainage path, but if the water is naturally going to a ditch or a storm drain or a creek, you can divert it there because that's its natural path. And then you can construct the system and then maintain the system. Maintenance is really important. First flush diverters, I know a lot of people ask about those if you've heard of them. I definitely don't see them always useful. It really depends on the site, but I'd say first flush, if you're just collecting from a simple system, is less necessary. They're pretty prone to freezing. And so I'm thinking that regarding maintenance, and just is less of a priority. This is also in the notes, so you don't have to memorize this, but this, I helped create this along with Stan Dean, who's our board chair and a retired engineer. And we created a table on what scenarios would trigger a permit with Jackson County, just to offer clarity for ourselves and other people. So if you're only collecting supplemental irrigation and you're collecting less than 5,000 gallons without a permanent pump, it likely won't trigger a permit with the county, but basically the more features and the more complexity, it could trigger a permit. So when in doubt, you can, ask me, you can ask the county. I always like to err on the side of caution, and even with projects that don't trigger a permit, I always follow the county requirements, just so I'm recommending things consistently. But it is important to note that yes, it is legal to collect rainwater in Jackson County for your water conservation needs, for your stormwater needs, but it could trigger a permit depending on the situation. And the other stormwater features potentially could trigger a permit. It has to do more with piping, but if it's just maintaining within your site, I personally haven't encountered situations where a rain garden triggers a permit. It's more having to do, I think, overflow if the plumbing is super complicated. It's mostly rainwater harvest that I've seen. So sizing a rainwater harvest system is pretty similar to sizing a rain garden when it's relevant to a roof. The size is just proportionate to the roof rather than just being 10 or 20%, though. It's a little more complicated of a calculation. So in this example, the roof is 700 square feet, so a pretty small roof. And then what you want to do is you multiply that by the annual rainfall. So wherever you are, the average annual rainfall in inches. And then you multiply that by 0.46%. This is a constant, which is just saying that you're likely going to lose water due to evapotranspiration. It's just a built-in constant. And this will give you the amount of gallons per year you can collect. And then you can size your tank accordingly based on how much water you think you'll be using throughout the season. So it doesn't hurt to get a bigger tank, but again, the prices vary drastically based on the size. So you can always start smaller and practical and work your way up, and you can always add a second tank. You can link tanks together. So if you're unsure, I would recommend starting smaller, and then you can just add to the system over time. Planter boxes, I'm not going to spend as much time on, but they're another option. You'll see them more by commercial lots, and they're kind of more of an engineered version of a rain garden rather than being dug in the soil. They're usually in a box that's made of concrete, or I've seen wood ones, but definitely an option. Less popular in this area, but certainly an option. We actually have one by our building as well. And we have plant lists for all of these features. And so there's two main types of planter boxes. One is that basically the difference is that there's pipe involved in the other one if the soils aren't as well drained. And then those are the materials list. Very, very similar to a rain garden, but again, they're just more engineered. We have plant lists and fact sheets on all of these if you're interested in diving more, but I know we're kind of running out of time here, so I'm going to start speeding through these so we have enough time for a Q&A. And then finally, we have riparian, which I already touched on riparian, how it offers a boundary of a buffer between your landscape and between the creek, and it helps buffer for water quality and erosion, all the things. Okay, I know that was a lot of information and I know it's a lot to take in. I've added more and less, but I've landed on this amount. I've done this class in other, areas, but I've decided I have to keep stormwater within this theme because it's just so related. So I hope that was digestible enough. And again, we'll have follow-up notes. But now we have our allotted Q&A time. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen temporarily just to see if there's any questions. And if there isn't, or if there isn't many, I can dive into resources as we have a little bit of time left.
Thank you, Kora. That was excellent and very comprehensive.
Great.
Yes. Really appreciate that. I don't see any questions in the chat. Okay. I do want to just shout out to Stan Dean. I'm glad that you mentioned that he worked with you on that chart, and that I did know that he's serving on the board of Jackson Soil and Water Conservation District. He's a key land steward. He has served on the advisory council for many years and as a mentor. And it's great that he's working with you now.
Yeah, Sam's great. And I also want to shout out Maxine Cass, is also a board member of ours. So our board's very involved. Yes. Yeah. So if anyone has any questions, feel free to type them in chat, or you're also welcome to come off mute. I know if you don't want to, you don't have to. But I'm happy to have this be a conversational time. Otherwise, I'm happy to review follow-up resources as well. So I'll kind of let that simmer for about 10 seconds, and then I'll reshare if there aren't any questions to share some resources.
I have a question, and it might be one of your resources.
Yeah.
So I often get questions about water storage and if people can get those on their property. Do you have a web page where it has when a permit is required and when it is not, so I can direct people to that and they can assess their land?
And I just want to mention that Grace is the director of the Master Gardener program. Grace is the one who just asked that question. So
yes, thanks, Marcy.
Yeah, great question, Grace. Yeah, I have there within the notes I'll be sending out, and I had it on a slide too. It described like different situations that would trigger a permit, because we really discovered that there really wasn't a resource like that, and sometimes navigating, the county and city websites can be a little complicated. So we have that. I also have I can show you it within the resources overview. I have my grant program, it's a rebate program it's called Stormwater Management and Water Storage Rebate. It's a little bit of a mouthful. But within that, even if you're not interested in a grant from us, it's a packet that acts like a large fact sheet. And the appendix within that has a whole ordinances section. And so I went through and I researched all the cities, researched the county, to ensure, depending on where you live, if it would trigger a permit. So I didn't see those resources out there initially, so I made it myself. And so I will be sending out an info sheet along with the follow-up notes on that program. And there's a link to where that section is, so everyone can have access to that.
Perfect. Thank you.
Yeah, definitely. Oh, yes. So Nicole had a question regarding tracker well water. So it's just called a well water sensor. There's lots of different types of designs. Some are kind of more of a probe. I know some have smart technology that can connect to your phone. Eventually, I would love to, there's a few other rebates I want to do, but one of the rebates I want to do is for well sensors. But yeah, if anyone has any other questions regarding that, feel free to contact me. There's also the Well Water Handbook has a water conservation section within it. And I think I have that on my slides as well. Yeah, great question, Nicole. Well sensor. Well, if there aren't any other questions, I'll pull my slides back up and just go through resources as time allows. And I want to be respectful for everyone's time. We have about 10 minutes. So if anyone has any questions, once I share my screen, I can't really see chat. So feel free to just unmute and chime in. Feel free to interrupt me. But otherwise, I will just reshare my screen. Okay. There's always a little bit of a delay. Oh, is there another chat? Oh, great. Thanks, Maxine. I appreciate that. So this likes to happen once I share my screen, it doesn't like to progress. It's frozen. Oh, there we go. Okay. So now I'm just describing different resources. And again, all of these will be in those follow-up notes that and the hyperlinks will be involved as well. Will be involved, sounds so serious. So this is our website. It's jswcd.org, and we have a lot of resources on here. We also have a shared drive where we have a bunch of other articles and stuff. So if you're ever interested in information, feel free to reach out. We also have a search box within our website for information. So this is our landing page for residential water conservation and adaptation. And there's resources and links within here. And one of these pages has these different resources from state and federal guides. And then we have some resources on local, and I have other pages, but Medford Water Commission and Ashland has some really great water conservation resources. We also have fact sheets and plant lists. So xeriscaping describes more of like those lush variety, and then the desert xeriscaping describes the more desert plants that I was talking about. And I have both the fact sheet and the plant lists. And then we have a general landscaping for water conservation fact sheet that touches on more of those behavior changes. So it's essentially just summarizing what was discussed. You can have that in paper form. And we have rain water harvest fact sheets, stormwater guides. So lots of information on our website. Feel free to explore. We also have a bunch of plant lists. A few years ago, I got really obsessed with plant lists. And so if, beyond just what we discussed today, if there's other consideration, including those fire resistant stuff we were talking about, comparing these plant lists with one another and then seeing where they overlap is a great starting point to select the different types of plants. Thanks for the feedback. I am seeing chat. This is great. Sometimes I don't. Come on. Okay, so here is the waterwise landscaping websites. And you could get lost on these things. I highly recommend you check them out. If you just Google Medford Water Commission, waterwise gardening, it'll pop up. And same thing with Ashland, Ashland waterwise landscaping. So depending on where you're located in the valley, I would just select because they have some more site-specific plants. And what's really cool within here is you can kind of go through some virtual tours for some design inspiration. And so you can click through the tabs and there's different categories. And so you can see, okay, you know, my category is water conservation, for example, or, you know, maybe you're looking for a specific ground cover and you don't know where to start. It can help you search for different plants. It can help you just with more aesthetics of what you want your yard to look like. It has irrigation tips within them. So super, super useful. I think they even have little YouTube videos on exploring the site. So I feel like you could have, you know, at least a 30-minute class just exploring the site. But these are really great websites. I refer my clients to these a lot. And it's great because all of the photos are local and the plants are local, and you can hover over pictures and it'll tell you what the plant is. So nice interactive websites. Those are hyperlinked in the notes I'll be sending out. And then Medford Water Commission also has some great water schedules. You can just Google Medford Water Commission lawn watering schedule and this will pop up. It's one page is lawn and one page is shrub. And so this will show you, if you do have an existing lawn, how long to water your lawn. That's kind of lawn, that's a tongue twister. But we actually don't need to water our lawn as much as we think. And so even in the dead of summer, according to here, you really only need to water about 60 minutes for your entire week. So a lot of folks overwater their yards, and then it's just like any other plant. Once you water a certain amount, it becomes adapted to that amount, right? So if we all kind of train our lawns to require less water, it's going to save us a lot of money, and it's going to save the whole, you know, water system less money as well, or less water. There's going to be more water to go around. So yeah, so, and they also have a page on their website. If you just type in Medford Water Commission, you know, like watering tips. And I think it used to be called InfoLine. It might be called something else now, but they adjust that website based on the climate, and it'll tell you a recommendation of how long to water your lawn that week or that month. So that's nice. And then here's a shrub watering schedule per week based on the type of irrigation. So also super nifty. And the links to these are also included in the notes. Web soil survey, for those of you who aren't aware, I kind of created a little stepwise on how to navigate the website, which I just realized I don't know if I included this in the notes, so I'll add that before I send that out. But it's pretty easy to navigate. It's not very case sensitive, so you actually type in your address. You go to their website, you just Google web soil survey, hit the green button, type in your address, and then you want to navigate to these little AOIs. It stands for area of interest. And then you're able to draw a boundary to get that soil boundary. And then you go to your shopping cart and hit free. Again, you don't have to memorize any of this. I'll be sending these steps out. I've done little demos on websites before. I don't think we have time, and it's kind of confusing between sharing screen and windows. But anyways, you hit free shopping cart, get now, and then it spits out a whole PDF of a soil report. And then that will describe the different soil layers and the depth to water table and whatnot. So that's how to navigate that website. And then here's the rain garden guide and the contents of what it describes. So it really is great from planning to installing, everything you'd ever need to know about installing a rain garden. And that's the link of how to get the guide. I think there is a more high definition, or whatever you want to call it, that is available for purchase, but then there is a free version you can download in PDF version as well. And lastly, if you are on a well, I just wanted to shout out the well water handbook. I'm sure this is not new to those of you who are on a well, but specifically on pages 9 and 10, they have some steps on water conservation with a well. So I wanted to mention that. And is there anything else? Oh, yes. So lastly, I wanted to give a shout out to little, shameless plug here on my stormwater management program. So I have a program. I made this in October of 19 is when we started doing this. Or was it October of 19? No, it was 2021. Sorry. We all know these last 4 years have been a blur. It was 2021. I certainly was editing it in 2019. But this program has really gained popularity. And so I wanted to just give a shout out. I know all of you who are attending this have water conservation in mind. And so definitely, the title of this is stormwater management, but it's definitely water conservation related as well. So if any of you are interested in applying for this or reading more, this is our website. I'll be sending an info sheet. The application period is quarterly, and prior to applying, I have everyone schedule site visits with me to walk around your site and determine eligibility. This rebate pays up to $5,000. It's reimbursement, so you have to install the project and then it's reimbursed at the end. But the project needs to be on the books before you do it. All the logistics are explained in the info sheet, but I just wanted to give a little shout out in case anyone's interested in this program, or you're interested in these different water conservation measures and these stormwater management measures, but the finances are an issue. There are programs out there. Our programs are kind of niche in that there really isn't any other agency offering kind of the smaller scale. And so that's why I wanted to create this rebate, because it definitely seemed like we had a local need. So I think 7:27, it's about time. This is my contact information. If anyone has any questions, feel free to reach out. I'd be happy to go out on site visits, or if you're interested in our rebate program, feel free to mention or to reach out. Sorry, I'm also trying to read chat as well. Oh, great. Okay. Nicole's just following up. Great. Yes, but I think that's it.
So Kora, thank you so much. This was really an excellent presentation, and your resources are amazing. As I said, there'll be a little bit of a delay in receiving the recording because our coordinator, Rachel Whirling, is away at a conference. Typically, you get the link to the recording the day or two after each of these classes. But when she returns, she will send the recording as well as the resources that Kora will send to her to distribute. So thank you all very much for attending. And again, thank you, Kora. This was really great. Good night, everyone.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. Good night.
Good night.